Whenever we read 1 Thessalonians, it is important for us to keep in mind that Paul is writing to Christians who are being persecuted because they continue to follow Jesus Christ. So it shouldn't surprise us that Paul, from the word go, begins to encourage them at the beginning of his letter. One of the ways he does that is by writing them a letter in the first place. By writing these beleaguered Christians a letter, it is a way that he communicates to them, you're on my mind and the minds of Timothy and Silas as well, all right? But he goes further in the content at the beginning of the letter. He lets them know, we are praying for you. In addition to that, we remember your acts of Christian service and your steadfast hope in Jesus Christ. He goes further and he lets them know that it is evident to him that God has chosen them. But because these folks are facing great persecution, Paul has the wisdom to understand, you know what, I can't turn in verse 6 and dive right into doing some exposition of some book in the Old Testament. I can't turn to talk to them about doctrine. I need to continue to encourage them. And he does. I want to pick up reading in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 6. Listen carefully. Paul writes, you also became imitators of us and of the Lord, having received the word in much tribulation with the joy of the Holy Spirit, so that you became an example to all the believers in Macedonia and in Achaia. Now, these are two regions of the Roman Empire that encompass modern-day North Macedonia and Greece. For the word of the Lord has sounded forth from you, not only in Macedonia and Achaia, but also in every place your faith toward God has gone forth, so that we have no need to say anything. For they themselves report about us what kind of a reception we had with you, and how you turned to God from idols to serve a living and true God, and to wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, that is, Jesus, who rescues us from the wrath to come. Now, as I began to prepare for this message and really examined these 5 verses that I just read to you, it became apparent to me that there are a number of fruitful avenues worth exploring. One of the first ones that jumps out at me is really answering the question, why is it that people continue to hold fast to their convictions even though they're undergoing great suffering and persecution for those convictions? Why don't they just cave in? Why don't they just give up? But you know what is I think helpful as it is to go down that avenue, I want to explore a different avenue, and that is the power of imitation and example. I can remember a particular Christmas Eve night when I was a little boy. My younger cousin Eric became the center of attention in a very humorous manner. See, my grandparents, all my aunts and uncles, and all my cousins, we had just finished opening up our presents. So you can imagine in this big living room, there's wrapping paper strewn all over the place. Boxes, you name it. I mean, it looks like a tornado just blew through. Now, once everybody finished opening up their presents, Eric got up in a very dramatic fashion and he began to stomp around the room. And occasionally he would take a box and he would smash it across his knee and throw it across the room. Then he'd take a piece of styrofoam and break it over his head and then cast that off to the side. as well. All of us knew what was going on as Eric stomped about the room. We could tell based on his tone of voice, his serious facial expression, the way he moved and carried himself. He was imitating WWE wrestlers. You see, Eric had been watching wrestling on TV. He'd been paying attention to how the wrestlers acted, how they spoke, how they conducted themselves, but also he paid attention to the reaction they received from the crowds. And so it crystallized in his mind, if you want attention, if you want to be the center of attention, imitate these guys. And that is exactly what Eric did. And he did it in such a spectacular fashion that even though we hadn't had a chance to really enjoy our Christmas presents, we were all transfixed on Eric and his imitation of these wrestlers. Think about it. Why is it that girls love to play with dolls? Why do they like to get an easy bake oven for Christmas? Why do they like tea sets? They like these items because they've paid attention. They've observed what their mothers and other women do, and they want to be like them. So by doing the same things that their moms and other women do, this is a way that they become like them. Even though it's play, it is quite serious in that it is used to make them like the women they want to eventually become. I love to play sports with the boys in my congregation. We play all sorts of different sports. But I find that when I am throwing the football to them, even though I put it right where they need to catch it, and what do? They take a routine, simple catch and they over-dramatize it. They turn a catch into an acrobatic circus catch, even though nobody's around them to try to swat the ball away or to try to intercept it. Why do they do it? These boys watch what the best wide receivers do in professional football, who make these dazzling contested catches. And these boys, without even probably thinking about it on a deep level, imitate the way those men play the game. One of the best ways to become something is to imitate, to act like what you want to become, who you want to be. This is common knowledge. It is not rocket science. It's actually quite ancient knowledge. We could read Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. He died before the time of Jesus Christ, and yet he recognized, he advised people, if you want to become a virtuous person, then start regularly acting like a virtuous person. And by doing this over and over and developing these virtues in a habitual manner, it will become ingrained in you and you will become virtuous. If you want to become courageous, then regularly start doing courageous things. If you want to become a great friend, pay attention to and imitate exemplary friends. The Apostle Paul recognizes the importance of imitation, not just in 1 Thessalonians, but we can find this in his other letters as well. He is not bashful to say, hey, be imitators of me. He recognizes that the way that he lives for Jesus Christ, if people live the way that he does, they will become better Christians. So I want to turn back to what I just read a moment ago in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, where Paul writes in verse 6, you also became imitators of us and of the Lord, having received the word in much tribulation with the joy of the Holy Spirit. As part of his encouragement to these Thessalonians, Paul affirms how they are imitating him, but most importantly, imitating Jesus Christ. If we're imitating Jesus Christ, we're going to be moving in a healthy direction of becoming the people that the Lord wants us to be. We know that imitation is working when it takes root in who we are. When these behaviors that we've been imitating begin to become second nature, when people can observe the change in how we behave, how we conduct ourselves, that's when we know that we are beginning to change. Again, it's taken root in who we are. As a Christian, I'm most concerned about us moving towards spiritual maturity, okay? All right, so I want to encourage you to imitate the right people. I mean, when we look in 1 Thessalonians, these Thessalonians have done a good job imitating the right people, Paul and Jesus Christ. Same thing for us as well. If we're imitating the example that Paul sets in Jesus Christ, we're going to be in a good position. I want to flip over and read to you again in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. You're going to see a subtle yet very important movement from 6 to 7. You also became imitators of us in the Lord, having received the word in much tribulation with the joy of the Holy Spirit. Verse 7. So that you became an example to all the believers in Macedonia and in Achaia. These Thessalonian believers have moved on to greater spiritual maturity. They haven't simply been stuck in imitating, but not really seeing any change. Oh no. Their imitation has led to real change, so much so that Paul sees it. He recognizes it, and he's comfortable enough saying, you guys are setting a good example. So that when Paul is talking to other people who are Christians, people who need some help, who haven't moved to the spiritual maturity that needs to happen in their life, he doesn't just need to look at himself and say, imitate me or imitate Jesus. Now he can say, hey, see those Thessalonians over there? Imitate them. And you know what? It should be the same thing for all of us. We shouldn't just be stuck imitating Jesus or Paul or other commendable Christians. We need to get to a point to where we move beyond imitation to where we've changed. We're becoming more mature so that other people can look at us and say, hey, I know that guy's not perfect, or I know that woman, isn't free from, all the foilables and all the flaws in life. But I can tell you what, if we live, more like them, if we imitate them, if we follow their example, we're going to move on to greater spiritual maturity. Okay, that's what I want to see for us. I want us to become examples. I want people to look at us and recognize, hey, they don't need someone to crack the whip on them to be reading their Bible, to be praying, and to be serving other people. They don't need someone, to push them to make sure they're showing up regularly for worship services. Oh no, they are setting the example for other people. You know what? I'll just leave you with this. We give children and adolescents a pass on immaturity. But when those same children and adolescents grow up to be an adult, we don't want to see them struggling with the same problems, to be manifesting the same immature behaviors. We expect them to grow up, right? We expect them to grow up. And you know what? It should be the same for us as Christians. We need to grow up. We need to be more like Jesus Christ and move on to set a good example for other believers. I thank God that these Thessalonians, even in the midst of persecution, grew enough to set a great example for other Christians in the region. And I pray the same for you and for me. Wait a minute, one more thing. Trust in the Holy Spirit. I want you to be praying, Lord, show me the areas of my life where I'm getting it right, where I am maturing, and show me the areas where I'm immature. Lord, go to work on those areas. Lord, help me to be more like you so I can set a better example for those believers around me. Because you know what? Instead of just simple imitation, we have the Holy Spirit residing inside of us that gives us the strength to change, that equips us to live beyond what we could do in our own strength. So thanks be to God for that. God bless you.